I used to think silence was safer than speaking. In our small town of Maplewood, where the biggest event of the year was the 4th of July parade, every whisper travelled faster than wildfire, and every whisper about me was the same, a disappointment. My mother, Rose, was a woman of stone hands and hollow smiles. She worked construction jobs that left her fingers cracked and her voice harsher than the winter wind. My father, Edward, believed emotions were as useless as a broken hammer. Between the two of them there was little left for me, only cold glances and colder expectations. Then there was Haley. Haley, the hurricane dressed in Sunday best, a football star, the town's sweetheart, the pride stitched into every family gathering. They cheered for her touchdowns, praised her high school glory like she was a queen. Me? I was the kid who couldn't run without coughing up a lung. I preferred comic books over cleats, computers over crowds, and for that, I became a ghost in my own house. Our Sunday dinners were performances. Haley at centre stage, me tucked in the wings, invisible. My younger brother, Owen, followed Haley's every word like gospel, and her husband, Ryan, sat beside her like an ornamental vase, silent, polished, empty. I learned early that my worth would never be measured in touchdowns or neatly trimmed lawns. It would have to be measured in something else, something they would never see coming. At 18, when I packed my few belongings into a battered sedan and left Maplewood behind, not one tear was shed for me, not that I expected any. I wasn't angry then. I was empty. And emptiness, as I would later discover, could be a far sharper weapon than rage. When you grow up as the invisible son, you learn not to announce your victories. You simply build them in places where no one's looking. After leaving Maplewood, I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at a time. Mostly tech support, night shifts, anything that paid in silence and anonymity. College wasn't a straight line for me, it was a battlefield. I lasted 2 years before I realised the system wasn't built for people like me. People who didn't have a cheering section, a backup plan, a net to fall into. Dropping out was the first decision I made without asking permission. It felt like breathing after years underwater. I stayed working at a dusty comic and gaming shop downtown, the kind of place that smelled like cardboard and teenage ambition. It was there that I met Mia, a coder with a laugh like static and a mind sharp enough to cut glass. Together we built something no one had expected, a cybersecurity firm, small at first, then quietly explosive. There were months when I slept on the floor beside the server racks, eating ramen and dreaming of something bigger. And slowly it happened. Contracts rolled in. Clients whispered our names in corporate hallways. Mia and I sold our company before my 29th birthday. I could have bought a penthouse, a Ferrari, a ticket to anywhere. Instead, I bought a small house 2 towns over from Maplewood, quiet, unremarkable, mine. I drove an old black Jeep with a crack in the windshield because I didn't need to prove anything, especially not to the people who had already written my obituary years ago. Back in Maplewood, they still thought I was stocking shelves at some forgotten comic shop. Haley still sent me emails once a year about how there's always time to turn your life around, the way one might talk to a stray dog. I didn't reply. Some things deserve the silence they're given. But Maplewood had a way of digging into your life when you least expected it. And Haley wasn't finished with me yet. It started with an alert. One of those quiet notifications that most people would ignore. Unauthorized credit inquiry. But I wasn't most people. Working in cybersecurity had taught me that true threats rarely announce themselves. They slip in unnoticed, masked as routine, waiting for you to look away. I didn't look away. Within hours, I traced the breach back to a private investigator based 2 counties over. Sloppy, desperate, worse, familiar. It didn't take much digging to connect the dots. The investigator's client was Haley. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my modest living room, the same one everyone in Maplewood assumed was a rented box over some liquor store. So this was how far she was willing to go. Not a phone call, not a confrontation. No, Haley needed evidence, proof that I was still the pathetic brother tucked away behind dust and failure. I almost admired her persistence. Almost. What she didn't know, what she could never have guessed, was that by prying into my life, she'd handed me the very leverage she thought she was stealing. I could have ignored it, deleted the alert, let her live in ignorance a little longer. But Maplewood had taught me one thing. Sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes you have to let the truth do the speaking for you. So I picked up the phone and I called the same private investigator Haley had hired. A different tone this time, casual, professional. Business, money. A few background checks later, I knew everything I needed to know. Haley wasn't just the queen of high school nostalgia anymore. She was the struggling saleswoman with 3 mortgages, a mountain of credit card debt, and a silent war brewing between her and the IRS. The perfect golden child had tarnished beyond repair, and she was too arrogant to even realize it. The first crack appeared at Sunday dinner. I hadn't planned to attend. Those gatherings were graveyards of conversation, monuments to Haley's supposed greatness. But this time, it was necessary. I needed witnesses. Rose, my mother, shuffled around the kitchen, barking orders as she laid out the roast. Owen fiddled with his phone, barely glancing up. Ryan sat stoic, dutifully sipping from a chipped coffee mug. And Haley, sitting at the head of the table like a general surveying her soldiers. She gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Evan," she said sweetly, "glad you could make it." We were just talking about responsibility, about how important it is to build a stable future, subtle, predictable, pathetic. I gave her a polite nod and settled into the empty seat across from her. The roast was dry. The conversation drier. They danced around me, as always, speaking about success, but never to me about mine. Haley slipped in jabs between bites of overcooked potatoes. Edward, my father, offered the occasional grunt of approval. Rose complimented Haley's latest imaginary real estate ventures. And through it all, I stayed silent. I let them dig their own graves, one polite comment at a time. Until dessert. That's when I placed the envelope on the table. Simple, plain, heavy. Haley's smile flickered. Rose looked confused. Edward frowned, suspicious. "You know," I said, my voice cutting clean through the noise, "since we're talking about responsibility, maybe it's time for a real conversation." I pushed the envelope toward Haley. "Go ahead, open it." She hesitated, the muscles in her jaw clenching visibly. But pride was her religion. She couldn't refuse the challenge. With a dramatic sigh, she tore open the flap and pulled out the first page. I watched the colour drain from her face. Debt listings, tax liens, foreclosure warnings. A neatly organised autopsy report of her financial life. Owen leaned over, trying to read. Ryan stiffened. Even Edward set down his fork, his heavy brow furrowing. "This," I said calmly, "is the future Haley's been building. 3 unpaid mortgages, 6 maxed-out credit cards, a pending investigation with the IRS." The room froze. The kind of silence that presses against your ribs and steals your breath. Haley's hands trembled. "I don't know where you got this," she spat, voice trembling. "But it's fake. It's all lies." I leaned back, lacing my fingers behind my head. "Is it?" I asked, mild as milk. "Because I can call the county clerk's office right now, or the IRS hotline, or better yet, your mortgage lender." Her mouth opened, then closed again like a fish yanked out of water. There was no air left to breathe. Rose finally spoke, voice brittle. "Hayley, is this true?" No answer. Just the slow collapse of a kingdom built on applause and denial. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to gloat. The evidence was enough. The truth, left to rot in the open air, was louder than any speech I could have given. Hayley shoved the papers aside and stood up so quickly her chair skidded backward. "You think you're better than me?" she hissed. "You think this makes you superior?" I didn't rise, didn't flinch. I just looked at her, the way one might look at a mirror that's finally cracked enough to show what's real underneath. "No," I said quietly. "It makes me free." She stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. Ryan followed, sheepish and silent. Owen stayed frozen in his seat, pale as milk. Rose buried her face in her hands. Edward stared at the space where Hayley had been, the frown on his face shifting into something like fear. No one spoke to me after that. No one asked me questions. No one demanded explanations. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one expected to apologize. I was the one they feared. And God help me, I had never felt lighter. After that dinner, the world inside my parents' house shifted in a way you could almost smell. Like old milk turning sour. Like wood starting to rot from the inside out. They didn't call me afterward. They didn't text. The silence wasn't cold, it was scorched earth. The kind of silence that follows after something irreversible has been done. I didn't miss it. I let the emptiness settle around me like a second skin. It took 3 days before the first real attempt at contact came. A text from Rose, my mother, pinged at 7:13 a.m. "Family is family. Evan. We need to stay united. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a weak demand for loyalty. The same kind they had expected from me my entire life, no matter how deep the cuts ran." I stared at the message for a long minute. Then I turned off my phone. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control. And that leash had snapped the moment I placed that envelope on the dinner table. A week later, a second message arrived. This time from Edward, my father. "We all make mistakes. Hayley needs support right now." I laughed when I read it. A low, humorless sound that bounced off the walls of my quiet house. Support. They hadn't spared me a second of it when I needed it most. When I scraped together rent, juggled jobs, built a business from nothing, clawed my way out of the grave they'd mentally buried me in, there was no support then, only judgment. Now, they wanted me to forget, to pretend, to fold myself back into the shape that made them comfortable. But I wasn't that boy anymore, and I had no intention of crawling back into their curated narrative. The final blow came from Owen, my younger brother, the one who had followed Hayley's shadow like it was the sun itself. He showed up at my door unannounced one Sunday afternoon. No text, no warning, just a knock, tentative and awkward. When I opened the door, he stood there with his hands buried in the pockets of his jeans, looking for once like he didn't know which side he was supposed to be standing on. "Evan," he started, voice brittle. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. This wasn't a conversation that needed comfort. "What do you want, Owen?" I asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. He shuffled his feet. I think you should come back, you know. For Mum and Dad. For Hayley. Things are a mess right now. Everyone's stressed. A mess Hayley created. A storm she summoned, thinking she would never have to stand in the rain. "Why?" I said, tilting my head. "Because now they finally have to see each other without me absorbing the blame for everything." He winced. "You're being unfair. Unfair." The word felt absurd in my mouth. I straightened, crossing my arms loosely over my chest. "Let me ask you something, Owen. When Hayley hired someone to dig through my life, to find proof that I was a failure, Where were you? When they laughed at my choices, dismissed my career, treated me like a burden, where were you? His face flushed deep red. He looked down, scraping the toe of his sneaker against the ground like a guilty child. I didn't know, he mumbled. I didn't think exactly. I cut in sharply. You didn't think. You didn't care. I let the words hang between us, sharp and final. I'm not coming back, Owen, I said, voice steady. Not for Hayley, not for them, not even for you. I expected anger, a defensive snap, a slam of the door as he turned away in rage. Instead, I saw something worse. Defeat. Owen nodded once, stiffly, and walked back to his car without another word. I closed the door before he could start the engine, and just like that, another thread tying me to the past unravelled quietly, almost mercifully. Over the next few weeks, the messages trickled in, each one more desperate than the last. Think about what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart. We just want things to go back to normal. Normal, their favourite word. A normal where I was the scapegoat, the afterthought, the cautionary tale whispered about at family parties. No, thank you. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was tired. Tired in a way that seeps into your bones and makes you realise that some fights aren't worth picking up again. So I didn't respond. Not with words, not with visits, not with explanations. My silence became my armour, and my absence became my answer. Meanwhile, the cracks in their perfect little world kept widening. Hayley's reputation in Maplewood, once untouchable, began to sour. Word spread. Small towns are excellent at that. Neighbours whispered about foreclosure notices and tax problems. Clients started pulling away from the dealership where she worked. Her credit, once a gleaming trophy, began to bleed out publicly, messily. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Karma didn't need a cheerleader. It did just fine on its own. And then there was Luna. In the middle of all this, in the quiet life I had built far away from Maplewood's rot, she was there, steady, brilliant, unapologetically kind in a way that felt revolutionary. She never once asked me to explain myself, never once treated my success like an accident or an anomaly. She simply saw me, not as a project, not as a disappointment, but as a whole person. Late one evening, sitting on her tiny apartment balcony with the smell of fresh coffee curling around us, she turned to me and said, "You know you don't owe them anything, right?" I nodded. But deep inside, something uncoiled, a knot I hadn't realised was still there, still fighting for scraps of approval, still hoping against reason. It loosened under her gaze. It dissolved. And, for the first time in my life, I knew it was true. I didn't owe them anything, not a call, not a visit, not a single inch more of myself. I was free. And this time I wasn't looking back. Freedom isn't a single moment. It doesn't come crashing down in fireworks or fanfare. It's quieter than that. It creeps up slowly, a growing stillness where the noise used to be. I first felt it on a Thursday morning. I woke up, sunlight slipping through the blinds, and realised no messages, no guilt-tripping voicemails, no demands disguised as invitations. Just silence. And it was beautiful. Luna and I had made a habit of quiet breakfasts together. Nothing elaborate, just coffee, toast, her laughter filling the kitchen like music. She wore an old hoodie, her hair still messy from sleep, and somehow it was the most honest thing I'd ever seen. "You're smiling," she said, grinning over her mug. I hadn't even realised it. The muscles in my face had forgotten how lightness felt. "Am I?" I asked, feigning surprise. She chuckled and leaned across the table, tapping my hand lightly. "It's good on you." And just like that, without fanfare or speeches, I understood this was my life now, unburdened, untangled, mine. It wasn't perfect. Freedom rarely is. There were days when the old patterns whispered at the edges of my mind, when I caught myself reaching for the phone to check for a message that wouldn't come, when guilt, old and stubborn, curled in my gut like smoke. But each time I reminded myself I had walked through fire to be here. I didn't owe anyone the ashes. Rose tried once more. A handwritten letter this time, clumsy and heavy with implication. You can't just erase family, Evan. Blood is thicker than pride. We only want what's best for you. I read it once, then set it down beside the recycling bin without ceremony. You can't erase family? Maybe not. But you can choose how close you let them stand. And my boundary was simple now. They could live their lives in Maplewood's small, crumbling shadows. I would live mine in the open light. I kept the coffee shop meetings to a strict minimum. An occasional, brief sit-down with Rose and Edward, purely for closure. They never apologised. Not really. They spoke in careful, blame-shifting phrases. We didn't know you were struggling. We thought tough love would make you stronger. We just wanted you to be successful. I nodded through it. Not because I believed them, but because arguing would have been like shouting into an empty canyon. Some people don't change. They just get older. Hayley never showed up to any of the meetings. I wasn't surprised. Her pride was her fortress, and it was crumbling too fast for her to rebuild in time. Last I heard, she had left the dealership job. Rumours whispered through Maplewood about foreclosure signs and bankruptcy lawyers. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just another cautionary tale in a town that loved to gossip but hated to listen. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sorrow either. I felt distance, clean, precise. The kind of distance that doesn't ache anymore. Spring bled into summer, the days stretched longer, the evenings grew softer. One night, Luna and I sat on the balcony, the city lights blinking like low stars beneath us. She tilted her head, studying me. "You ever think about starting your own family someday?" she asked, voice casual but careful. I took a long sip of wine before answering. "I used to think family was just chains," I said slowly. "Obligations, expectations. A mirror you were forced to stare into until you hated what you saw." She didn't interrupt. She let me unspool it at my own pace. "But now," I smiled faintly, "now I think family is something you build. Not something you're born into." She smiled too. That quiet, brilliant kind of smile that told me she understood, not just the words, but the spaces between them. "You'd be good at it," she said, bumping her shoulder against mine. "Maybe I would. Maybe I already was, just by choosing something better for myself." One morning, I opened my laptop and found a photo tucked in an old digital folder. It was from high school. One of those staged family portraits, Hayley in the centre, smiling like a homecoming queen. Rose and Edward on either side, proud and oblivious. Owen grinning awkwardly at the edge. And me, barely visible, tucked into the background, half shadowed, half forgotten. I stared at it for a long minute. Then I clicked delete. No ceremony, no hesitation, just one clean motion. I didn't need to hold on anymore. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I didn't need them anymore. Freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even bittersweet. It was sitting across from Luna at breakfast, laughing over bad coffee. It was walking into a room without shrinking. It was waking up each morning without dreading who I had to become just to survive. It was mine. Every flawed, quiet, beautiful inch of it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wonder if I deserved it. I didn't ask permission. I didn't wait for approval. I just lived it. Freely. Unapologetically. Finally. Story 2. Growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, life was never luxurious. My dad spent his days sweating away at the local paper mill, while Mom juggled cleaning jobs around town to help make ends meet. They worked hard, no one could say otherwise, but money was always this heavy cloud hanging over our house. I'm Ellie, 35 now, and I have a younger brother, Carter, who's 30. 5 years isn't a massive age gap, but when you're kids, it feels like a lifetime. By the time Carter came along, I was already in 2nd grade, tying my own shoes and packing my own lunch while Mum and Dad shifted all their focus to the new baby. I don't think it was intentional at first, but the divide between us grew roots early. Where I was expected to be independent and figure things out on my own, Carter got the royal treatment. New toys, special birthday parties, every scraped knee fawned over like a national emergency. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the helper, the babysitter, the one who knew better. In school, I found my escape. I was a nerd through and through, obsessed with science fairs, coding clubs, and spending late nights building Frankenstein computers out of hand-me-down parts. My parents were proud-ish. They loved telling their friends that I was so smart, but the real excitement was saved for Carter's football games. Rain or shine, they'd be in the stands, cowbells and all, screaming like lunatics. No one cheered when I won the regional coding competition. No one even came to the award ceremony. When college decisions rolled around, I had stars in my eyes. MIT, Caltech, places where kids like me actually fit in. I'd worked for it. Every late night, every summer job, every AP class. But the reality check hit hard. Dad sat me down one evening and said, "We just can't afford that kind of tuition, Elle." I nodded, heart hammering against my ribs, and agreed to go to the local state school. Commuting from home to save money was the final nail in the coffin of my teenage dreams. A few years later, Carter, with his barely passing grades and no real career goals beyond maybe sports, got a full send-off to a private college 3 states away. Dad refinanced the house to pay his tuition. I found out over breakfast like it was a minor weather update. It stung. God, it stung. But you learn to swallow that bitterness after a while, or it swallows you whole. Fast forward a decade, I built a life for myself. Worked 2 jobs through college, took out scary student loans, grinded in entry-level tech jobs, until I finally landed a role at a top software company. These days, I make good money. 6 figures, stock options, bonuses. I'm proud of it, even if no one back home really gets what I do. Carter, meanwhile, drifted. Personal trainer for a while, then car salesman, then something involving consulting, which sounded suspiciously like unemployed. Mum and Dad kept bailing him out, paying his rent, clearing his credit card debt, smiling through gritted teeth. I stayed in touch. Dinners when I visited, holiday calls. Birthday cards with gift cards tucked inside. We weren't close, but we weren't strangers either. I guess I thought that was enough. Then Carter met Lila. Lila, 28, was everything Carter wasn't. Polished, confident, with a marketing job at some flashy firm and parents who still vacationed in the Hamptons. Within 6 months they were engaged, and suddenly it felt like our whole family was playing dress up in a life that wasn't ours. The wedding plans were insane. A destination venue in Charleston, custom suits, a 7-layer cake flown in from New York. Dad and Mom, still on a fixed retirement income, scraped together $15,000 to help them out. And then Carter called me. "Hey, Elle," he said, voice a mix of charm and desperation I knew all too well. "Lila and I were wondering if you could help out too. The budget's getting crazy. We're looking at about $70,000 now, maybe. $120K from you. I nearly dropped my phone. $120,000. For a wedding? I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. I'll pay you back, he promised, like he was asking for a ride to the airport, not a life-altering loan. I told him I needed time to think. He sounded disappointed, but ended the call with an overly cheerful "love you, sis," that felt like nails on a chalkboard. That weekend, we had a family dinner at my parents' place. It was supposed to be casual, pot roast, mashed potatoes, the usual, but Carter steered the conversation straight toward wedding talk faster than you could blink. He gushed about the venue, the band, the dress, waiting for me to jump in with my wallet wide open. I stayed quiet. He didn't. "You're loaded," Carter said, a little too loudly. "Come on, Elle. It's not like you have kids or anything to spend it on." The words hit me like a slap. The subtext wasn't even subtle. I was successful, sure, but in their eyes, still somehow a failure for not building a real family. I took a deep breath. "Carter, I'm proud of what I've built. But my money isn't just sitting around for other people's dreams. I have my own goals, my own life," he scoffed. "All you do is sit at a computer all day. It's not even real work." I stared at him, feeling something shift permanently inside me. All those years of sacrifice, of being overlooked, of swallowing every slight for the sake of family, and here he was, dismissing it like it was nothing. I stood up, calm, steady. "I'm not funding your wedding, Carter, and if you can't respect that, we have bigger problems than party planning," he exploded. Called me selfish, bitter, a cold-hearted bitch who would die alone with her money and her cats. "I don't even have cats, for the record," Mum cried. "Dad told me to just do it for the family." I grabbed my bag and walked out without looking back. Since that night, it's been radio silence, except for the group texts filled with guilt trips, pleas, and a few not-so-subtle threats about uninviting me if I didn't make this right. Guess what? They uninvited me. And honestly, it hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But it also felt freeing, like stepping outside after a storm, into the wreckage, and realizing you're still standing. The day after that family dinner, I woke up to a dozen missed calls and a flood of texts. Carter, Mum, Dad. Even a few random cousins I barely spoke to anymore, chiming in with their 2 cents. Most of the messages followed the same tired script. Family comes first. You're being selfish. Can't you just let it go? The best one, though. You'll regret this when you're old and alone. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my lap, just numb. I guess I always knew where I stood in this family. I just hadn't expected them to make it so obvious. I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to any of it. And that, apparently, made things worse. 3 days later, Mum showed up at my door. No call, no warning, just pounding fists on the door until I opened it. She looked smaller somehow, worn down, and for a second, just one, the old guilt crept in. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I could meet them halfway. Then she started talking. She launched into this speech. How Carter was heartbroken. How this wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. How Dad was thinking about taking out another loan to help cover the extra costs. "And all because you can't just help your brother out," she said, wiping fake tears off her cheeks. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her performance. That was all it was, a performance. Because what she really meant was, "You're not doing what we expect, and that makes you the bad guy." I told her calmly, firmly, that I wasn't going to change my mind. That $120,000 was insane for anyone, and especially for a wedding. That Carter and Lila needed to live within their means like the rest of us. Mum's face hardened. Like I'd flipped a switch. "You've always thought you were better than us," she spat. "Ever since you went off to that fancy job." I didn't argue. I just opened the door wider and waited for her to leave. She did, with a final glare over her shoulder that said everything she didn't have the guts to put into words. A week passed. Then 2. I thought, maybe they'd cool down. Maybe after the wedding, once the dust settled, we could have a real conversation. Instead, Carter doubled down. He sent a text. "No hello, no how are you? Just, since you clearly don't care about this family, consider yourself uninvited. Don't bother showing up." And just like that, I was out. I wasn't surprised, hurt. Yeah. But surprised, no, because deep down I knew I was never really in, not the way Carter was. The wedding rolled around without me. I didn't hear much about it, aside from a few half-acid updates from my cousin Maddie, who was Team Ellie quietly, but didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. Apparently, it was as extravagant and ridiculous as they'd planned. Private estate, gourmet everything, fireworks at the end, the kind of thing you see in magazines and think, wow, that must have cost a fortune, which, it did. Funny thing about fortune, though, it runs out fast when you're bad at math. 2 months after the wedding, I got a text from Carter, out of nowhere. "Hey Elle, can we talk?" No apology, no acknowledgement of the way he'd treated me. Just a reset, like nothing happened. I stared at that message for a long time, long enough for my coffee to go cold. Eventually, curiosity won out. I agreed to meet him at a diner halfway between our apartments. Neutral ground. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked tired, older. The cocky golden boy aura was gone, replaced by something brittle and thin. He didn't waste time. Turns out, the marriage was already falling apart. Debt piling up. Arguments about money. Lila's parents had pulled their financial support after a huge fight over prenups. Carter had taken out 2 personal loans, maxed out 3 credit cards. He was drowning, and now he wanted me to help him get back on his feet. Same Carter, different crisis. Same solution in his mind, me. I listened quietly. I let him talk. And when he finally ran out of excuses and pleading looks, I said what I should have said a long time ago. "Carter, I love you. You're my brother. But I'm not your lifeboat. I worked too hard to build what I have. And I'm not burning it all down because you don't know how to swim." He stared at me like he didn't understand the words. "Family helps family," he said finally, voice low and dangerous. "Funny," I said, grabbing my purse. I could have sworn family also respects family, and then I left him there, sitting in that cracked vinyl booth, surrounded by cold coffee cups and broken dreams. The fallout came fast. Mum called the next day, sobbing, demanding to know why I was abandoning my brother. Dad chimed in with his usual "you think you're better than us" speech. I listened for about 10 seconds before hanging up. Because here's the thing, I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was finally choosing myself. And yeah, it was lonely. It was brutal. Some nights. Grief has a funny way of showing up like that, sneaking in when you're brushing your teeth or waiting at a red light. But it also made space for something better, something quieter, something real. Peace. After that last diner meeting with Carter, the silence was almost deafening. For the first time in my life, there were no texts asking for favours, no guilt-tripping voicemails from Mum, no passive-aggressive Facebook posts about ungrateful children. Just silence. At first, it felt wrong, like standing on a dock after the boat's already drifted away, like looking around and realising the people you thought would always catch you. We're never really holding the net at all. But then something strange happened. The silence started feeling like freedom. I focused on work. Signed up for a coding boot camp just for fun, sharpening skills I hadn't touched in years. I started going to the gym again. Had dinners with friends who made me laugh so hard my ribs hurt. Little by little, my world stopped revolving around the people who only knew how to take. I even started dating again. Nothing serious, just dipping my toes into something I hadn't prioritized in a long time. It was awkward, hilarious, and weirdly healing all at once. I wasn't rebuilding. I was building something new. For the first time, it was for me. Meanwhile, Carter's life, well, it kept spiraling. Word trickled down through the grapevine, mostly through my cousin Maddie, who had the family tea on speed dial. Apparently, Carter and Lila had separated 6 months after the wedding. The debt was crushing. The fights were brutal. And Lila? She moved back in with her parents, leaving Carter with a pile of unpaid bills and a mountain of regret. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel vindicated. Mostly, I just felt sad. Sad that it had to come to this. Sad that no one had stopped enabling him earlier. Sad that my brother had spent his whole life thinking the world owed him a handout, and now there were no more hands left reaching for him. About a year after the whole wedding mess, I got another text. Short, simple, I'm sorry, that's it. No explanations, no long-winded justifications, just 2 words I had never ever heard from Carter before. I sat with it for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond right away, to crack open that tiny door of hope. Another part of me, the wiser part, knew better. So I waited, not out of spite, out of self-respect. 3 weeks later, Carter asked if we could meet up again. No money talk, he promised. Just coffee. Just a conversation. I agreed, but with one condition: I wasn't going to fix anything. I wasn't going to carry anything. If he wanted to rebuild a bridge, he'd have to lay the bricks himself this time. We met at the same diner, same cracked booth, same cheap coffee, but Carter was different. He looked tired, humbled, older not just in years but in spirit. He didn't try to charm his way through the awkwardness, didn't dodge the hard stuff. Instead, he told me the truth about how he realized too late that chasing image over substance had cost him everything, about how he resented me growing up because he thought I made life look easy when everything felt so hard for him, about how he was trying now, really trying, to get his life together without expecting anyone to save him. He even said the words I never thought I'd hear. You were right about all of it. That conversation didn't magically fix everything. Years of resentment and hurt don't evaporate over one coffee. But it was a start, a real one. We agreed to take it slow. No pretending the past didn't happen. No sweeping it under the rug. Just showing up, little by little. Coffee here, a text there. Birthdays remembered, wins celebrated, losses shared. Not because we had to, not because family demanded it, but because we both wanted to. That made all the difference. As for my parents, that's a longer road. They never really apologized, never fully admitted how much they'd hurt me. They still think Carter's mistakes were just youthful missteps, and that I was too harsh for setting boundaries. But I stopped needing their approval a long time ago. These days I keep my distance. Polite check-ins, holiday cards, surface-level conversations. It's sad, sometimes. Like realizing the house you grew up in was never really home, but it's also freeing, because home isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes Home is the people who show up when it matters. Even if, for a long time, that person is just yourself. People like to talk about forgiveness like it's this big, dramatic moment. Like you have to throw your arms open and let everyone rush back in, no questions asked. But forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about choosing to heal, even if the people who hurt you never say they're sorry. It's about giving yourself permission to move forward without dragging all that brokenness behind you. It's about peace. Hard-earned, fought for, messy, glorious peace. And let me tell you, it's worth every single painful step it takes to get there. So yeah, I refused to fund my brother's extravagant wedding. I was uninvited. I was alienated. And months later, I found myself, really, truly found myself. Turns out the best thing I ever did for my family was learning how to choose myself first. Story 3. You ever get that feeling like you were born into the wrong family? Yeah, that was me, pretty much from day one. I'm Lily. And by the time I came along, my parents, Martin 64 and Diane 62, had already closed the chapter on raising kids. They had their perfect daughter, Melanie 31, and they were more than ready to ride off into the golden years. Then surprise me, the oops baby. Or, as they used to joke at dinner parties, their midlife crisis gift from the universe. Ha ha ha. Mum had been grinding her way up the corporate ladder, one promotion at a time, and Dad? Well, Dad mostly followed her lead. If Diane said jump, Martin asked how high and whether he needed a presentation about it. Melanie? She was basically a third parent to me, when she wasn't busy ignoring my existence altogether. She was 13 when I was born, and by the time I could form full sentences, she was already living it up in her college dorm, forgetting I even existed. They didn't plan for me. They didn't want me. They barely tolerated me. I figured that out pretty early. Growing up, home felt like walking on a carpet made of broken glass. Picture this: pristine, white walls, a house that smelled like lemon cleaner and tension, and furniture you were barely allowed to sit on. A 5-bedroom mansion in a swanky Boston neighborhood, a gift from Grandpa Edward, who figured if they couldn't love me properly, at least he could buy me a nice prison. And yeah, it felt like a prison. Mom missed most of my milestones because of important meetings. Dad half-heartedly tried to pick up the slack, but usually ended up waving me off with a not now. Lily whenever I tried to show him a drawing or ask for help with homework. If it wasn't for my Aunt Claire, I'm not sure I would have made it. She's Mum's younger sister, the black sheep who dared to be an artist instead of a corporate warrior. She was the one who showed up at every recital, hung my crooked finger paintings in her sunny studio, and taught me how to cook a decent meal by the time I was 10. She made me feel like I mattered. Like I wasn't just an afterthought. School was my refuge. Clubs, projects, after-school activities. I was that kid who stayed late helping teachers just to avoid going home. Everyone thought I was such a quiet, well-mannered kid. No one realized that was survival mode. At home, it didn't matter how many awards I racked up. Science fair, honor roll, doesn't matter. Mum's only response was a distracted, "That's nice, honey," while she typed furiously on her laptop. Dad would pat my head absent-mindedly if he wasn't too busy arguing with clients over Bluetooth. Melanie barely remembered I existed unless she needed to complain about how I wrecked her old room with my messy kid stuff. Even holidays didn't feel like holidays. Unless you count feeling like an intruder in your own house as festive. Grandpa Edward, though, he saw it all, and he didn't just stand by. By the time I hit middle school, he started slipping me little envelopes. "Just a little something for you, Lilypad." For later, birthday cards with checks, deposits into a private account under my name. He made me promise not to tell Mum and Dad, just in case, he'd say with a wink. At the time, I thought he was just being generous. I didn't realize he was building a lifeline. The countdown to freedom started when I was 16. 2 more years. Just 2 more years, and I could leave for college and breathe for the first time in my life. But of course, life had other plans. 2 months before my 18th birthday, Melanie dropped the bomb. She was pregnant and getting married. And guess what? She and her fiancé were moving back in because raising a baby is expensive. And family is supposed to help family. My parents were over the moon. Me? Not so much. I started noticing weird things. Mum measuring my bedroom windows. Dad peeking at my college brochures like he was calculating square footage, not supporting my dreams. And the tension. God, the tension. Like they were just waiting for the right moment to spring something on me. It came on my 18th birthday. I spent the morning at Aunt Claire's, homemade pancakes, heartfelt gifts, and a quiet, perfect celebration. Claire even insisted we video call Grandpa Edward, who gifted me the latest iPhone and said cryptically, "Keep it charged, Lily, and record everything important." At the time, I thought it was just Grandpa being Grandpa. When I got home, phone in hand, still on the video call with Grandpa, everything inside me told me to brace for impact. The front door was unlocked, the air reeked of fresh paint, and the house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like an ambush. I climbed the stairs to my room. The door was closed, something I never did. I pushed it open and felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. My room was gone. Gone. The walls were a soft baby blue, my bed replaced by a crib. My bookshelves, my desk, my posters, stripped away like they never existed. Teddy bears, rocking chairs, diaper stations. Everywhere I looked, it was a shrine to the son my parents actually wanted. I stood there, staring, as my mum's voice snapped behind me. "Lily, what are you doing here? What happened to my room?" I stammered, holding up the phone automatically, Grandpa watching everything unfold live. Dad stepped in, clearing his throat awkwardly. "We needed the space, honey. The baby deserves the best." Mum beamed like she was announcing a Nobel Prize. "You're 18 now, Lily. It's time for you to move out anyway. We packed your things. They're in the garage. You can grab them on your way out." I thought maybe, just maybe, this was some sick, messed up joke. But they weren't kidding. I don't even remember much after that. Just flashes. Dad dragging me by the arm, telling me not to make a scene. Mum hissing about how the neighbours are watching. My belongings, my life, stuffed into battered boxes, dumped in the garage like yesterday's garbage. And me, standing there on the front porch, homeless, heartbroken, holding a phone with Grandpa still watching, whispering, "Don't worry, Lily, this isn't over." He was right. It was just the beginning. That night, I slept at Aunt Claire's house, or more like, I stared at the ceiling while the weight of everything crashed down on me. 18 years of being polite and good and quiet. 18 years of swallowing it down and telling myself it would get better. And this was my prize? Kicked out like trash, replaced by a nursery, erased like I had never been part of their story at all. But the thing about hitting rock bottom is there's nowhere left to go but up. And Grandpa Edward? He had a plan. He called the next morning, his voice calm, like he was just talking about the weather. "Lily," he said, "Melanie's wedding is in 3 days. I want you to come." I blinked. "Grandpa, I wasn't even invited." "You are now," he said. "Trust me." And when Grandpa said, "Trust me," you listened. The day of the wedding, Claire helped me get ready. She pulled out a soft blue dress. Nothing fancy, but it fit like it was made for me. "You sure about this?" she asked, brushing a hand over my hair. Positive, I said. I wasn't going there to make a scene. I wasn't going there to fight. I just needed to be there, to exist, when everything they'd built finally came crumbling down. We showed up to the reception hall, this big, over-the-top place with chandeliers and velvet curtains, and a floral arch that probably cost more than my first semester of college. People stared when we walked in. We weren't exactly on the guest list, and you could feel the tension crackling in the air like static. Mum's face turned the colour of bad wine when she spotted us. Dad stiffened. Melanie actually dropped her champagne glass. Claire and I, we just found our seats, way at the back near the kitchen doors. Typical, I didn't care. I wasn't here for the chicken or the cake. I was here for the show. Grandpa Edward sat up front, looking every bit the dignified patriarch in his sharp navy suit. He smiled when he saw me. The ceremony itself was nauseating. Melanie glowing in her designer dress. Mom dabbing fake tears. Dad pounding every dude's back like he was the king of the world. They acted like nothing had happened, like I wasn't sitting right there. It was honestly almost funny if it wasn't so sad. Then came the speeches. The best man made his little toast, slurring his way through a few inside jokes no one understood. People clapped politely, and then Grandpa Edward stood up. At first, everyone just smiled. Oh, how sweet, the beloved grandfather saying a few words. You could almost hear them thinking, if only they knew. Grandpa tapped the microphone twice, clearing his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice calm, steady, dangerous. I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you all deserve to know about the happy family you're celebrating today. The whole room froze. Forks stopped clinking. Laughter died in throats. And that's when the projector flipped on behind him. The video started playing. My video, the one from my birthday, the one where my parents threw me out, the one where they erased me to make room for the real family. You could hear my mum's voice, cold and sharp, telling me there was no space for me anymore. You could see my dad physically pushing me toward the door. You could hear me crying, begging, reminding them it was my birthday. The room went silent except for the audio. And it played all the way through, no cutting away, no mercy. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched as my mum's friends turned to stare at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Watched as Dad's co-workers muttered under their breath. Watched as Melanie's in-laws' faces twisted in horror. Melanie's new husband? He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. When the video ended, Grandpa set the microphone back on the stand and said, simple as anything, I no longer recognize these people as my family. He turned to look straight at my parents. Effective immediately, I am updating my will. All trust funds, investment accounts, properties, everything will go to my granddaughter Lily and my sister Claire. Martin, Diane, Melanie, you are disinherited completely. He paused. And for the record, he added almost conversationally, I've also divested my interests from the companies where certain individuals are employed. Cue half the room practically gasping. Because what nobody at that wedding really knew, or maybe they forgot, was that Grandpa wasn't just some sweet old man. He was old money, deep connections, silent board member in Dad's firm, silent investor in Mum's clients' companies. And just like that, he pulled the rug out from under them. Chaos broke out immediately. Mom rushed the stage, screeching something about private matters and family business. Dad tried to salvage things, sweaty and red-faced, trying to laugh it off like it was a joke. Melanie was sobbing, mascara running down her face, wailing about how this was supposed to be her day. Meanwhile, guests were grabbing their coats and heading for the exits like the building was on fire. One of Dad's clients, a big-time guy in real estate, literally ripped up the contract they'd just signed. 2 weeks ago, right there at the table. Mum's best friends turned their backs and left without a word. Melanie's new husband quietly slid his wedding ring off and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Yeah, it was that bad. Claire leaned over and whispered, "You ready to go?" I nodded. As we left, Grandpa caught my eye and gave me a tiny nod, proud, solid, unshaken. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. Leaving that wedding felt like shedding a skin I never needed in the first place. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. I walked out the front doors, head high, with Claire and Grandpa at my side, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. It didn't take long for the real fallout to hit. 2 weeks later, we were standing in a courthouse, staring across the room at Mum and Dad, who were now pretending to be the concerned, loving parents. They'd hired lawyers, image consultants, probably a crisis PR team too, from the way they were dressed like they just walked out of a catalogue for wholesome American family. Mum had toned down her power suits to a cardigan and pearls. Dad even carried a Bible under his arm like he was auditioning for a part. But no costume in the world could cover up what they did. Claire's lawyer, a quiet, sharp woman named Miss Patel, stood up and laid everything out. The video footage from my birthday, played in full. Financial records. Turns out all that college fund Grandpa had been sending for me over the years. Mum and Dad siphoned it off into Melanie's trust fund. Emails, text messages, wire transfers, a paper trail so long you could wrap the courthouse in it twice. By the time Miss Patel finished, the judge looked like she needed a minute to process the pure audacity of it all. Mum tried to cry on the stand. Dad tried to blame stress and misunderstandings. It didn't work. Not with the videos, not with the bank statements, not with Grandpa sitting there calm and stone-faced, a living reminder that not everyone was buying their performance. When the verdict came down, it was swift and brutal. Claire was officially granted my legal guardianship. Even though I was 18, it gave me protection while the civil cases played out. The court ordered my parents to repay every dollar they stole from my support fund, with interest. A restraining order, 500 feet minimum, no contact allowed. And cherry on top? The judge referred their case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, neglect. But honestly, the legal victory wasn't even the best part. The best part was watching their world collapse under the weight of their own choices. Dad's company, the one Grandpa had secretly been helping to keep afloat for years, opened an internal investigation. Turns out Dad wasn't exactly a model employee without Grandpa's invisible support. He got demoted so hard he ended up sharing a cubicle with the interns. Mum? Her reputation in the business world went up in flames the second the birthday video started making the rounds. Clients cancelled. Contracts disappeared. Her name started quietly vanishing from company rosters and charity boards. Even the country club, their precious country club, asked them to resign to avoid further embarrassment. Socially, they were radioactive. Old friends crossed the street to avoid them. Neighbours stopped waving. Their whole golden image smashed beyond repair. As for Melanie, her husband filed for an annulment less than a month after the wedding. Apparently, marrying into a family that kicked their daughter out on her birthday wasn't the kind of family values he wanted raising his kid. She moved back in with Mum and Dad, into the nursery that was supposed to be her perfect future. Except now the house wasn't even theirs anymore. Because guess what? Grandpa hadn't just cut them out of his will, he'd transferred ownership of the house into one of his business trusts. 3 eviction notices, and 1 sheriff's visit later, my parents, Melanie, and her unborn baby were officially homeless. Funny how fast karma moves when it's been gathering momentum for years. And me? I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. Claire and I made her cozy little house truly ours. We painted my room in warm yellows and soft greens. We built a reading nook under the window with fairy lights. Every morning I woke up to sunlight and the smell of coffee, not cold silence and resentment. I finally understood what it meant to feel safe. Grandpa set up a scholarship fund for me. Full tuition, books, everything. Covered. This fall, I'm starting college, majoring in psychology, focusing on family trauma recovery. Because if there's one thing I know inside and out now, it's how deep those wounds can go and how much strength it takes to heal from them. Sometimes people message me and ask if I ever miss my parents, if I ever feel guilty. The truth? I mourn the idea of what they could have been, but not who they are. They still try to reach out sometimes. Emails, letters, even a ridiculous lawsuit claiming I defamed them by telling the truth. Our lawyer laughed so hard reading that he had to put his coffee down. Because here's the thing about the truth. It doesn't need defending. It stands on its own, solid and quiet, even when the liars try to shout it down. As for my parents, they're a cautionary tale now. A whispered story in old neighborhoods and dusty boardrooms. The golden family that fell from grace. The ones who traded their daughter for a nursery and ended up with nothing. I'm not angry anymore. I don't need revenge. I have peace. I have people who love me, not because they have to, but because they choose to. And after everything, that's the only kind of family that matters. Thank you for reading my story. If you're stuck in a place that doesn't feel like home, remember, you are allowed to leave. You are allowed to build something better. You are allowed to choose yourself every single time.